Hey, that's a good question. And when I think about civilization, I don't quite think of it in the same way, under the same definition that you do. I noticed that you lumped government into there, or you could call it state form government, where it supplies itself with money through coercion. Um, I actually don't think that's part of civilization. I actually think that's something from the underbelly of it. Um, but when I think of civilization as we know it, I immediately think of agriculture. I think that agriculture was the root, no pun intended, of civilization. That some people figured out how to grow a lot of food, enough food themselves to feed, uh, I don't know, 10, 20, 50 people, um, just through their own work. And that as soon as they did that and they started feeding people, um, that people started wanting to give them gifts back. And I, I say that because we as human beings and even monkeys, we have an incentive to reward people who reward us. We like it. It makes us feel good. Uh, uh, which I'm sure by now you've probably figured out that I'm an atheist anarchist. And I'm such an anarchist that I actually think that the state is a religion, that the only reason it exists is because of its agents, or how to put it, that it actually doesn't exist. Only the agents of the state actually do exist. And I think that's pretty much the same as the church, any religion, pretty much, that what they support doesn't quite exist, but the agency does. But I actually think, to go back to what I previously said, what I think that implies is that the first civilizations worked off of a gift economy. That is, people just gave things, and from their giving, they also received things back just out of people's kindness. But that eventually, that excess time that people had, which allowed them to make excess, to make things that they didn't need to give to other people, that eventually ins- caused incentives for other people to start living around there. And as soon as enough strangers came in and the population was too large for anyone to know each other, people became concerned about what would be called free rider problems. They didn't want people to get things who wouldn't be giving things back. And so they came up with something like a barter system. And, the rest of the civilization came after that. But I actually think that the state as we know it, which is um, taking taxes by force to protect you, I don't think that the state as we know it could have existed prior to civilization. I don't think that a hunter-gatherer tribe would be able to support a state. It would be a very extremely weak state. It would be very hard for people to keep up with the demands that something like a state as we know it. Uh, it would be hard to keep up with the supplies that would demand for it to actually be able to overpower all the tribes in the area. So I vehemently do not think that a state existed prior to civilization. I actually think that the state as we know it just leeches off of civilization, and I mean including the courts. I think courts existed. We know roads exist where there's no state. The state just comes in and paves over it and then asks for money to keep it well maintained. So, yeah, what you said about technology, I really don't think that there's such a thing as technology versus people, except for maybe when it comes to weapons. But I think in general, technology is there to facilitate giving people extra time. I mean, I get to turn on this thing called a computer, which, given what they do now, doesn't it seem like it's improperly named to be called a computer? I know it does a lot of computations, but it seems like such an inaccurate name now. But I get to turn this thing on, and I get to log into YouTube, and I get to see almost immediately people like you asking very evocative questions, and I get to make this kind of reply also. So I don't think that technology is against humanity. I don't think it's against nature, um, mostly because I think that human beings are a product of the universe, that nature is a product of the universe, and we're a product of all those things. So nothing we do is unnatural, but there are costs to every action that a person makes. There's always a cost to every thing on the planet does, and that includes tigers and lions and wolves and you name it. There's always a cost. There's always going to be a cost, and there's no avoiding that. So I don't really think that there's too much of a technology versus humanity thing going on. I also don't think that there's too much of a civilization versus nature thing. I actually think that civilization and nature help each other. By people congregating into higher density areas, the city I live in has like a population density of 1,200 per square mile, and it's not that big of a city, but it's the biggest city around. And for every person that's living in a densely populated area like a city, that means there's more open space that has fewer people occupying it, which actually helps nature, I would say, or nature, which to me just means a lot of biodiverse species competing in an environment which has happened to work for them for a long time and still does. I don't really see it as much more than that. I mean, I think if gazelles could talk, they wouldn't be too happy about being hunted down by lions and tigers and having buddies who are too stupid to fight back. So